In 2004/2005, depending on where you lived, the PlayStation Portable came out. This was Sony's very first handheld, and it was a revelation. Its competitor was a Nintendo handheld, which we'd been pretty used to Nintendo handhelds to that point, the Nintendo DS, which also was an incredible and iconic handheld. But these two existed during a time where the differentiation between Nintendo and Sony and even Microsoft Xbox was actually significant enough that living in a camp of defending one over the other or preferring one over the other actually meant something, as opposed to now when everything releases on every single platform. The DS was obviously incredible, groundbreaking, but ultimately it was Nintendo, and it was very much family friendly, kid safety oriented. But Sony was cool. Sony was the JRPG machine, but it was also for grown-ups. So the PSP gave you music, videos, unrestricted internet access, as well as games that were not quite family friendly, like God of War, or games that were of the JRPG ilk, like Kingdom Hearts, in a package that felt a lot more cohesive and full than, say, like Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories coming out on Game Boy Advance, or any of the Final Fantasy remakes that came out on Nintendo DS. It was the handheld for the grown-up kid and adult. A few versions of the PSP were released, the PSP 1000, 2000, and 3000, which were the same thing, but essentially in slightly different form factors, slightly different screens, etc. But today, we will be talking about the PSP Go, and more specifically, how to change the housing on it. I'm your cool Uncle Marissa, and let's dive in on how I reshelled my PSP Go and rewind a little back as well. What is the PSP Go, and how did I end up with one, and is it worth your time? That lead-in really made it feel like I should have some intro music here, and then I come back with the answers, but I don't have an intro, so let's just get into it. This is the PSP Go. This is reshelled. This is not a color it actually came in. It only was available in black and white. And interestingly enough, actually, this blue shell is inspired by a prototype that they had. This was a prototype color. It was supposed to also come out in this color as well as red, but it didn't because it had really poor sales. And why was it that it had poor sales? Because we were a nation once. We were a people. We were a society. This has no UMD drive. So with the PSP, you don't have cartridges, you have UMDs, which are mini discs, and the game is on those discs. But at the same time, you could also download games off of a digital storefront. It was very much the best of both worlds, and kind of, I think, the ideal scenario for those of us who appreciate physical media, and something that Nintendo continues to do to varying extents. We all know the game key cards are kind of messing things up a little bit, and it's kind of been that way for a little while, especially with a lot of cartridges coming out without much of the game on it. And you have to download the rest. What happens when the servers go down? You know, those kinds of questions arise. Anyway, this was when we had the best of both worlds. And they were also pushing like movies on UMD, so that was pretty fun. I never acquired any of those, but yeah, I really have a soft spot for it. I love the whirring of the disc while you play. It's like you're holding your PS2 really just close to you, and it's small. And I was personally really blown away by the graphics. I felt like I had the closest thing to a home console that I was able to without actually having a home console. Back to the PSP Go. The PSP Go does not have a disc drive. Where would you fit it? It's so tiny. It's so compact. So no disc drive. And at the time, that was rather horrific, because what do you mean you can't play your physical games on it? And now I'm not saying this is the only reason that it didn't work out, that it wasn't a huge success, but it's a pretty significant reason, especially if you had a PSP already, because it had been a few years by now, And this did not come with like new games. This was not the PS Vita. Not that the PS Vita has many games. That's not a great comparison. This wasn't the 3DS to the DS. This was the DSi to the DS. It played the same things. So you have a PSP already. You have a bunch of games. Why would you get this? It doesn't make sense. So yeah, it didn't do very well. And like many consoles that did not do well in their time, it is now highly sought after and goes for a pretty penny on the secondhand market. Now, some cool things about the PSP Go is that it is incredibly light, incredibly small, so thin, just slides into your pocket. It has a new type of memory card that it takes because, as we all know, Sony was really obsessive about proprietary forms of memory for a really long time. To be honest, the battery life on this is actually really fantastic. My PSP 3000 dies really quickly when it's not even on. Whereas this, I don't charge it for weeks on end and I pick it up and it's still telling me the time. By the way, I'm aware I keep holding it this way. It's because the ND filter on my camera, if I put it right in front, it filters out the screen. But yeah, it's incredible. It's very much an accessorized PSP. Look at that lanyard. You could ostensibly just put it on the lanyard and carry it on your bag or something if it didn't cost like so much to replace. In terms of flaws, the sliding mechanism, you've got the ribbon cable that's connecting the screen to the bottom half. And so the screens go out on these a lot because the ribbon cable gets pulled out or deteriorates. It's not a hugely difficult thing to fix, but if that's not something that you're into at all, that can be a problem. I honestly sometimes even will pop this open and it like will stay black and I have to do it again. And I think it's like there's just some lack of contact happening, even though the screen cables and everything are new in this and they are connected. So it's not without its quirks. And I was very curious to get my hands on one, especially after I tried out the horrible Anbernic RG Slide, which is not this, even though they were trying to be this, because it's the size of my head and it's heavy, but it has its fans, which I think is incredible. And I had found one on eBay for parts that was super cheap. I ordered that and they never sent it to me. And you know, I know people love getting quick refunds, but sometimes it's a little upsetting because I was like, I haven't gotten it yet. And eBay just refunded me and canceled my order. And I was like, no, but I wanted it. Make him send it to me. So one day I was just talking about this stuff and one of my wonderful viewers was like, I have a PSP Go where the screen doesn't turn on. And if you want, I can send it to you. I found it in a dumpster. Now, it came to me and it was somehow like, yeah, I can see that this was in a dumpster, but at the same time, it was like, this is in quite good condition for being in a dumpster. And yeah, it wouldn't turn on my live stream. I tried to replace the screen ribbon cables, found out that none of that was the solution, and the actual issue was the backlight fuse had blown out. There was a lot of arguments on the internet and different views on what the backlight fuse was, because it sure wasn't the accessible one. The backlight fuse is on the main board, and you will see this when we do the teardown. Sony has everything covered in like a metal heat sink that you have to pop off, and then there's still that railing around the components. So this fuse is like right next to the railing, so you can't even get your multimeter in there properly without like shorting contact. So I had to cut that as well, and it was quite a project, but I replaced that fuse and the backlight came back. So that was super exciting, and I've been really enjoying this handheld. I really was worried it would go the way of the Game Boy Micro, another console that for its shortcomings didn't do terribly well in the moment. I mean, logically, how is the Micro going to compete with the Game Boy Advance SP? But it has now developed a huge cult following, very high resale value, and I just can't love it. So I was worried that would be the case with the PSP Go. It was not. I really love this thing. And you know, I feel a little guilty that I am fond of this digital only device. But A, with jailbreaking, you know, it's kind of smooth sailing from there. Pun not intended. And it's not a current contemporary right now console where I want to buy new games. So that's that. And I have my PSPs to play UMD drives on. Big fan. And definitely a certain attachment to it for having done quite a surgery on it. If you are interested in that, I have a write-up on it on my Ko-fi. Shameless plug moment, I guess we can do it in the middle of the video. If you join my Ko-fi, it's $2 a month. You can get access to write-ups as well as game reviews that are not write-ups, they're videos. But I had initially diagnosed this issue on stream on Twitch, and later I did a write-up with visuals of how I fixed the backlight. So that's how we come to the Reshell. It is pretty well known that PSP reshells are not good. We've been really spoiled with Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance reshells because you can find every component at a stellar quality at this point. PSP, not so much. The housing itself isn't the worst. You might have to do some modifications, some clipping and snipping, but the buttons are bad, especially weird little stuff like joysticks. I have never had an aftermarket PSP joystick for the regular PSPs at least work well. They're all for some reason sunken. It's like they had a bad mold and then no one's just ever bothered to fix the mold. Everyone just reuses the same crappy mold. And there's not really any like indie sellers, as far as I know, who are casting them in resin at home either. So it's very much a good thing to follow of reuse your own joystick. At the very least, reuse your own joystick. Some other finicky parts I imagine are probably the trigger buttons and power buttons and stuff. And at that point, it's like, well, might as well reuse the face buttons. But I feel like face buttons could be okay, but I haven't had that experience. So yeah, so it's not really ideal to reshell a PSP of any kind. However, as we will see, the only marks of this PSP having been in a dumpster is that there were markings on the frame around the display as well as a crack on the bottom. And neither of them really affected functionality, but it's a good opportunity to mod something. And so I went between colors a lot. I was like, should I just do black? Should I do white? Should I do blue? And I kind of randomly settled on blue. And that's what we're gonna do. And just a tip for you. So I ordered shells off AliExpress twice, and both times they got returned to sender. What is happening right now for some reason is that Nintendo and Sony are coming down on AliExpress sellers in China for stuff that has their logo on it, for consoles that are retro and no longer for sale or in circulation at an official level. It's very stupid and greedy and confusing. On the Nintendo side of things, High-Speed Edo, I think they might not even be on AliExpress anymore last I checked, but they have their own storefront. And Cloud Game Store shut down for a while to kind of scrub their store and get rid of any logos that are apparent, and then they came back up. But it's really frustrating and very confusing as to why these companies are doing that when they're not actually selling. Like, it's not cutting into their sales. Like, does Nintendo think like more people will get NSO if they can't reshell their Game Boy? I don't. Anyway, so my PSP Go shell got returned to sender twice. So huge shout out to pspeverything.com, which is run by, from what I understand, a passionate PSP modder who was just curious. I saw a post by him where he said something like, oh, I was just curious to see how much people would buy from me if I did this. And so he basically just drop ships the long way. I think, he has the inventory sent to him from China, and then he sells them like a one-man retro game repair shop of retro modding for PSP. So I ordered from him, and third time lucky, I got my shell. So if you are in the US, I do recommend maybe buying from him if you can instead of AliExpress. He also does not mark up like crazy. And on the flip side, there's a lot of really expensive PSP shells on AliExpress, and I think that's likely the sellers acknowledging is probably going to get sent back, so they're raising their prices. So unlike the usual dance, it's actually not the fact that a reseller is more expensive significantly. He was both cheaper and equal to sellers on AliExpress. Before we jump into the how-to, what should we know in advance? So first off, we should know that I did this on stream. This was my first time doing this, where I recorded the content for a video on stream, and I don't know if I'm gonna do it again, because apologies in advance for bits that might have the camera go out or just not the best angles, things like that. It's very distracting to me doing things on on stream and then having that extra thing to worry about. I did try to fill in most all of the gaps though, either with on-screen notes or voiceover. And then in terms of what you need a Phillips 0 screwdriver. That's it in terms of screwdrivers. There's no tri-wing screws or anything weird in this, which is fantastic. And you probably need a spudger because there's a couple of plastic tab pressure fit parts. And there's also a few tabs as well for ribbon cables that you can use your nails or a spudger or some other tool. While I always make the recommendation to be careful while pulling things and opening things up, I also want you to relax a little bit. The PSP Go is a little deceptive in that it looks like there's a lot going on in it because of the sliding mechanism, but it's actually quite straightforward. So obviously not as straightforward as like a Game Boy Color, but a lot more straightforward than you'd expect. I think even to me, personally, more straightforward than a regular PSP somehow. And finally, as I say in all of my repair or modding videos, watch the whole video before you attempt it yourself. All that being said, let's go take a look at the repair table. So let's take a look at the PSP Go and the original shell and see what the issue is. So you can see right here on the bottom, we have this crack, which is not the most pleasant to look at. And the front of the casing has a lot of scratches and what low-key look like chew marks. I don't know, the little pin dots, but it was found in a trash can, so super valid. So let's take a look at what is in the kit. So it comes with the shell, most of it. It does not come with the metal back shell. It comes with shoulder buttons and face buttons, as well as the buttons that are on the top of the body. It also comes with plenty of screws, the start and select button, and a couple of the internal stickers. Because of the sliding mechanism, it was a little intimidating to tackle breaking down the PSP Go, but it starts pretty easy with the 4 screws on the back. Another great thing about this is that it uses, for the most part, the same screws everywhere. So except for a couple of points, you don't have to worry too much about keeping your screws super organized because for the most part, it is the same screw. Once the back screws are out of the way, we can go ahead and take out the top screws. There's 2. Next, one of my least favorite things, it's spudger time. So using a spudger, we're going to go across the bottom half of the back plate and it should pop out. Thankfully, it's not attached to any ribbon cables or anything, so you don't have to worry about accidentally damaging a component. Shout out to iPods and many other things. Next, we have these ribbon cables that are attached to the right and left trigger buttons, and you can use your nail or a spudger to remove those cables. Usually I use my nails, but my nails were super short and just not in good shape when I was doing this. So you'll see me struggling. That's what I get for my anxious nail biting habit. The reason we're doing these ribbon cables is because underneath them is a screw, and you're not able to access it without removing the ribbon cable. Or you are, but I wouldn't recommend taking that risk. Now we can pop out the battery. Make sure to be careful. Thankfully, it doesn't seem like this has aged to the extent where, you know, sometimes you take out these connectors and the connector comes out with it. Shout out iPods again. iPods aren't that bad. It's just, I'm just thinking about them a lot. And once the screws are out for the trigger buttons, we can take that assembly, which is a two-parter on each side, and move those out of the way. With all of the buttons you're taking out, if you are doing a reshell, make sure you know which ones are yours so you don't get them confused with the aftermarket buttons, because spoiler alert, the aftermarket buttons are really as bad as they say. Next, we'll unscrew the little bit on the bottom, which covers the port cover, and that way we can access the joystick. Keep in mind, this does not just lift out. I use the tip of the screwdriver to press against the sides where there's these little clip thingies, and that helps lift it out. Unfortunately, this was a camera died situation, but I do show it again later. One thing to be mindful of is that the screw holding in the 3.5mm jack, it goes through the jack as well as the joystick. Under the joystick, we have two important ribbon cables that we need to remove. So we have this one that is coming from the other side of the PCB. This one, very easy to do with your nails. If you don't have nails, you can put something through there and pull. It's one of those thick ones. You could also, if you have rubber tweezers, use those. To get to the flimsiest ribbon cable in the world, which is the blue one that goes up to the buttons on the top, we need to remove the screw on this plastic sticky bit that sits under the battery. If you want to set it aside and keep it clean, you're welcome to, but that's something that I personally replaced because that's not really a low quality thing. And let me just show you, so you might be tempted once everything's out to just pop it off, but the PCB is attached to the screen here. It's very hard to show, but there is a cable that is just pressure connected right over here. So you want to use your finger or spudger or something, get it in there and disconnect that. And then I'm going to pull out the flimsiest cable in the world. And we can finally put the PCB to the side. This is that connector that was plugged into the front. From here, we can pick out the face buttons and put those to the side. Do not try to remove the buttons from the membranes. I did this once on a PSP. That's not how these are put together. The buttons are actually attached. They are part of the membrane. It's kind of crazy. I don't know if it has to do with like copyright or something. From here, we have a couple of black screws on the black frame, one above the D-pad and the other above the face buttons. Next, we can tackle the screws on the back of the metal back. Slide it open and you'll be able to access two of the screws that way. Then we can unscrew the top screws. That's all we need to get the front frame off. You could use a spudger, but even with my horrible nails, I was able to pop the top frame off. Once the frame is off, you'll see that there's no lens or anything attached to the frame. The screen is just there. There are the speakers and the buttons on the side. You don't have to do anything with these if you're just changing the shell. Now we want to take the bottom half off as well. There's another 2 black screws, and once those are out, it'll pop right off. Before putting everything back together with the new shell, I highly recommend checking under the screen and making sure that the ribbon cable is attached on all ends, because one time I had to disassemble it again because my ribbon cable had slipped out. And that's a common thing with the PSP Go, is that the screen will stop working because the ribbon cable just slipped out. The new shell's kind of put together, so you have to take it apart a bit, especially if you want to use your own parts. Unfortunately, the bits on the side are not removable, but I'm going to pop out the port cover, which you just squeeze at the pins and pull it out. Next, let's take the button cover and the button board off of the original one. I didn't have to use any heat to take this off. It did come off easily. Peel slowly. You don't want to rip it or damage it. If you are having issues, I would use a hairdryer on low or something, and that should help it come off better. The trigger button membrane and cables are also attached to the bottom frame with adhesive, so we're also going to carefully remove those. Same tip as the button board. Removing the start and select was a struggle because it's like a 2-parter. So let's take a look at that. So the buttons themselves are tactile buttons that sit with the ribbon going through the slot into the back. And the start and select itself, the ring is attached to the buttons, and it is an adhesive. So you need to use something sharp like an X-Acto knife or something to lift it. And if you want to reuse it or reuse the frame or something, be really, really careful. I tried to be careful, and I did spare the frame, but I ended up scratching the ring on the button. But once that comes off, the tactile button board is a lot easier to remove. The adhesive, similar to the previous adhesives, is pretty light, so we can just lift that up. Again, you could probably do this with your nails and then just pull it through. The cable goes in through the hole on the new frame, and just press it down and you are all good. I went a bit back and forth on whether to keep the original back or the new one. because you can see even on the new back, the Sony logo isn't printed on perfectly well, and it just doesn't have the contrast that the OEM does. But before we do that, we have quite a bit to do still. We need to put the 4 black screws back into the frame. I think my camera died when I put the frame on the screen on already. With that, I just reuse the buttons. That's kind of the theme here, reusing the buttons. So we're also going to put back the 4 silver screws on the back of that as well. Remember that you do need to put the bottom screws in through the bottom frame, through the holes that allow access when it's slid open. Now we can put our face buttons and D-pad back in. Also, don't forget your side buttons, the power button, as well as the, I believe it's the Wi-Fi button. Those go on the side. I had to put them back later because I forgot. And make sure you use your OEM ones. I was struggling a lot once I'd put mine together. This was after the stream. Something just felt really off. And I realized that I had used the new buttons as opposed to the old ones. And it just makes such a difference. It actually blows me away how bad the new buttons are. Once all that's in, you can put your motherboard back. First thing we want to do is attach that ribbon cable from the screen to the motherboard. Again, this is one of those things that's hard to show. I'm kind of just feeling for it so that I can show it to you. You could also hold the PCB up, and that way it'll be easier to have them meet at a sort of right angle. Once this is done, take the ribbon cable that goes under the joystick and insert that. This was once again somewhere my battery ran out or something briefly. But you want to do that so that when you screw down the joystick, you don't have to unscrew it because you forgot to put that ribbon cable in. Next, I'm going to put that blue ribbon cable in from the buttons on the top. It's just pressure fitted despite being so flimsy. And we can take a look at the top button board. That just snaps into place, and if you want, you can kind of press each button just to make sure that you have aligned the button board correctly. Since you just kind of slap the adhesive on there, there is not a terribly accurate guideline for where it goes. Next, we'll put the bottom port cover on, and this one also just snaps into place. Next, we have the 2 screws that go into the port cover. Then we can put our left and right triggers in. Remember, those are a 2-parter and they screw in. I had some trouble with the second part, this little guy on the right hand trigger sitting flush. So I did end up having to trim the post that it sits on with flush cutters. That was the only part of the shell, the new shell, that I did have to modify. But don't be surprised if you have to modify something on yours. It just was not sitting smoothly. Next, the battery sticker thing, insulation thing, mine got all dirty. So I went ahead and used the new one. It does not come with the metal screw hole, which is like, okay, so you will have to salvage that from the old one. I also found it best to screw it in before really pressing down on the adhesive and smoothing it out, because that way it will be aligned correctly. I forgot to put my power and Wi-Fi buttons in before I screwed down the motherboard. The smaller of the two does actually go in a bit easier, but the larger one, I had to unscrew the left-hand side before being able to lift it up enough to put it in. And this is in fact the one that I picked up incorrectly, the aftermarket one, and was causing me a lot of grief after the fact. It just wasn't really staying in place. Basically, whenever I powered it on, it would lose its place and it would no longer be holding on to the power switch. So that's a big issue. It was also causing the motherboard to sit a little higher than it should. One thing to note is these shells do not come pre-threaded. So when you are screwing in the screws, you are creating the new threads, which is very stressful because it requires pressure. And, you know, for me at least, when I'm working on consoles, a big thing is to not apply too much pressure. So essentially what I'm doing is I just go around and screw them in a little bit more each time so that the pressure is kind of evenly spread out at least. And before doing my final closing up, I'm just gonna test everything. I noticed that the joystick, for example, felt a little too difficult to move. So I was like, okay, I might need to screw it in a little more, and it moves a bit more freely now. On stream, I completely forgot the battery. Don't do that. So here was me putting the battery in. Don't forget to put the ribbon cables from your left and right trigger back in. That's something you can do sort of towards the end, just because it's a top layer activity. And before you close it up completely, but when the battery is in, it's always useful to check that it turns on. Yeah, you'll notice how there's no buttons. That's between me and everyone who was in the stream. But yeah, it works. And the way the back goes on is it just snaps. And I ended up using the black back because it's fine. It's got some scuffing, but nothing crazy. And I just don't like how the new one, like, it's just so difficult to read the Sony and the PSP, and some of the Y is missing. But I think it looks good. The black and blue is pretty neat. And don't forget those 4 screws in the back. All right, and that is it. We are all set and all put together and all blue. Babadee babadoo. Babadook. Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward and fairly, I'd say, medium easy task to complete to reshell PSP Go. There's one thing. Here I noticed later, can you see that brown spot? So I think what happened is whatever coating that they put on the shell might have had some excess, and it got burned by the process of like UV curing. It's not horrible. It's easy to not worry about, but you can see that even the shell itself has a handful of problems. So I really don't recommend reshelling unless you have to. And even in my case, I was like, do I really have to? Like, it's cosmetically not ideal, and if people see this, they might think that I chew on my consoles, but so I did back and forth quite a bit on it. So I definitely think that if you don't have to, you don't have to. But absolutely keep your OEM buttons, because any of the buttons that if I accidentally put in the aftermarket one, suddenly just like something wouldn't work properly. Something wouldn't close properly. And honestly, I think the blue and black looks really cool. So it did turn out quite well. That is all. Thank you for watching. I hope that this was helpful in reshelling or deciding whether to reshell your PSP Go. Right now, the names of my Ko-fi subscribers are going down. Also, I'm still running a GoFundMe for my cat, Marcel. He went to the ICU early this year. $15,000 bill because he was in the hospital for a week. But that's why he's alive now. And that is priceless. Unfortunately, that doesn't pay his bill. So I am fundraising on GoFundMe to help speed up that payment process. I really do appreciate any little amount or any lottle amount. It does make a difference, genuinely. I'm like, if half of my subscribers all donated $1 each, that would cover the whole bill. Yeah, thank you so much if you've already supported. If you aren't able to, if you can share a GoFundMe, that would also be very helpful with your cat-loving friends. All that being said, I have been your cool Uncle Marissa, and don't forget that you are always welcome at Cool Uncle's house. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.